Okay, I guess I'm going to call this meeting to order. It is 6:30, maybe 6:35 around here, on the 28th. This is the meeting of the task force. So Denny Hall's here, Sarah Mellish is here, Ann Harrison is here, Richard Smith is here, Sue Philbrick, I saw you on Zoom.
Here.
And I don't know who else.
Sandy's sick, as you probably
I
know.
know Sandy's out. Gar, are you on Zoom?
He often shows up a few
You
minutes.
may be a little late.
I think he leaves his house at
And
6:30.
Michael Pratt, are you there? Okay, well, we'll just go with what we got. First order of business is discussion of overlay districts. I'm going to hold off on communications until we get to public comments.
I was going to suggest that if we're going through the districts in detail, we might take public comment while
On
we're
each one?
discussing the districts, yeah. It seems a little easier.
Okay, we can do that.
I don't know.
I support that strongly.
Okay.
Right, let's do that then. Okay, so let's start off with our big district, which is the Pine Street, Newport Park, Elm Street, Powder House, Morse Court area. And so we did get a communication today from Lorraine Giovanni. And she was worried about Newport Park because she thought if we got rezoned, it would somehow wipe out the affordable units and would be short those units on the SHI.
Hi, Gar.
Gar?
Hello.
There's a comfy seat for you over there.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So Gar, we're starting off talking about districts. And
Good.
I'm going to be taking public comment as we go through each one.
Great.
So the first one is the Pine Street, the Morse Court Elm Street
Yeah.
area. And I was just pointing out that Lorraine Giovanni had sent a letter today worried about units at Newport Park being taken off the SHI as a result of being rezoned. And I just want to state that they would not be, that in fact there are those units have to remain anyway, but by rezoning it, we could allow for additional units, which would help economically stabilize the property and make it much better.
Yes.
And hopefully allow people to get off of those second floor units as well.
Right.
Is there any lingering concern that this could endanger its eligibility under UHLC standards?
I don't believe so. I think,
Mass Housing Authority controls it.
yeah.
Oh, I understand it. but-
So the question is, can it be, the last I heard from Emily was that as long as we're not requiring it, we're requiring it as part of zoning to be senior housing, we're okay.
So we can zone it even if it's deed restricted to being,
That's right, and the same with, there are some senior restricted units at 21 Pine, and
and
again,
at 22 and 24.
No, 22, I looked up the deeds and the master condo documents
Oh, good.
for 20 and 22.
Okay, sorry.
And there's no restriction in them with respect to age or anything. If there's any type of restriction, then it would be the members of the condo association doing that, and that wouldn't control.
Okay, but we can zone it even if, so Newport Park would work and the 21
Pine should
Pine
work.
works, good.
As long as we don't require that they be restricted in our zoning, that's fine.
Okay,
And in fact, at Newport Park, my guess is quite the opposite. Would be opening it up to even market rate housing if it helps the project survive.
So
Disabled already there.
There are disabled already there, that's right.
yeah.
when you look at the numbers, that Newport Park property was really important to making that whole region work.
Yes,
And Emily's comments at the Monday meeting set me back a bit. She seemed to indicate that there was some kind of question and that she wasn't 100%.
well, I haven't gotten legal counsel to opine on this.
Okay, it's just a warning flag, because that really upsets the apple cart.
Sure, of course, yeah.
That makes our 20 acres.
No, that upsets the cart for getting Newport Park reimagined as well.
It would mean having to, I think it would mean having to add on additional parcels to that. zone.
But we can put some on at the, we could put some on at the Powder House Lane area, like crossing Sawmill Brook and going into Ninth Circle and
Right.
Front Street.
Yeah, we could. Not preferable, but it's
Not
possible.
preferable, but
And you'll have the whole rest of Pine Street, which is D2 already.
yeah.
So one of the things we're gonna get into shortly is trying to figure out how we tinker with the lot coverage and setbacks and things to get to the density that we want.
I'm concerned that there's no cap on the number of units per lot. If they're using 2,000 per unit,
It doesn't work. Can't do that.
what?
But you can't,
Can't we put a cap of 15 per acre?
I think
We could do that.
if you look at the model, you can't get away with caps per parcel. But you do have this control, which she has not put into play, which is the square footage for the first unit and the square footage for second units. And that very finely controls what happens both on small and large parcels and sets the density to anything you want. I've tuned that region anywhere from 12 to 20. And when you do that, you see that the more dense you make it, the more intensely you affect the smaller parcels, because you have to make the square footage low. As it is, that region has to be somewhere in the range of 2,500 square feet for the first parcel and under 2,500 for the second, is my recollection.
Yeah,
There are two different zones there, so you probably would do there'd be at least two parts of that, I would think, that would be different, as you've alluded to
Well,
before.
I was looking at the Pine Street properties. And
Just the Pine Street property.
I was just looking at the Pine Street because I didn't happen to have it in my spreadsheet before, so I was looking at those. And there's a few, and I was using 2,000 per unit.
Yeah. For what it's
And-
worth, I would say that
There's a couple of,
Just the bigger lots there.
right, which could have 14 or 15 on a half acre.
Yeah.
And so if you had a maximum density of 15 per acre, you'd limit those to
I suppose that could work, but for what it's worth, I find that to be like using a hammer on the problem. Because, you set the limit to 15, it doesn't work for the one that went to 8. Whereas if you use the square footage, it tunes it right down. But we can worry about that later, I guess. The trouble with setting the cap is that it affects every parcel the same.
Yep.
And you don't want to affect every parcel the same. You want to affect a 1 acre parcel slightly differently than you affect a 1.5 acre.
Couldn't we have a cap if it's over a certain square footage?
Yes, you can put a cap so that you say that within a parcel, you must have X square feet for the first unit, and every additional unit must be an additional number of square feet.
That I want to put a cap on.
That puts a cap on it. That puts a cap
No,
on
it
it.
doesn't.
Yes, it does, because you've got
Limits-
10,000 square
The size
feet.
of the lot would
You know
therefore
what?
limit it.
If you're going to include a 6,000 square foot lot, you need 2,000 per unit to make it eligible for multifamily.
Yeah,
If you use that 2,000 per unit on a 30,000 square foot lot, you get 15 units.
that's right.
Yes,
And
and you
I'm
pretty much have
saying-
to do that.
It seems to me that if a lot's over a certain size,
Well, you can play with it, but I think what you're going to find out is that you don't get the density you need.
There is one place where we could definitely do it, which is the LCD. We could just simply say at the LCD,
Right.
we want no more than 103 units, period.
and we
Yeah.
could increase the density at Powder House Lane
Yes,
to help in the other areas.
yeah, we can do that also.
The other thing that Chris and I were talking about is not necessarily cap the number of units on a particular, like you say, a half acre parcel where you could put, let's say, 10 units. Instead of having one large 10-unit building, cap the number of units per building. So we had talked about perhaps 4 units a building. so that you're reducing the massing and the size of the building. I mean, you can still go through architectural review with a 10 or 12 unit building, but the mass of the building is going to be rather large.
It would be like the units that are on the left side going out Pine Street. On the left, there are those condos that are going up the hill. They're like.
Left side of what?
Pine Street, just beyond the gas station.
There's condos on Pine Street.
Yeah,
There's no there's no condos on the hill. There's a
Yeah,
house on the hill.
really beyond that, there's a series of condos right along the street that are,
The four,
Across
20
the-
and 22.
yeah, I guess that's right. So
Yeah.
those are examples of smaller buildings that kind of break up the scale and make it look more.
I wonder if you do, multiple buildings. First of all, you're creating a disincentive to do it,
Yeah.
which isn't all bad. However, can you still meet the setback and parking requirements if you do that? Because you're eating up, if you have separate buildings, all of a sudden you're eating up a lot.
So the model would, I believe, and this is Richard, maybe if we put that in, I mean, the model will still show you could build 15 units or 10 units, whatever it is, but in all reality, the builder might only build 2 4-unit buildings because he's got to have separation between the buildings, extra drives, and he's going to have a limit on the lot coverage. So you might artificially be pushing that number down realistically a little bit by breaking up the numbers of buildings. Plus,
But it doesn't impact the model.
But I don't believe this is more of a question. I hadn't a chance to talk to Richard about that.
I think what I would say, rather than to quibble with anybody's suggestion, is that I don't see how we come to a good result here without digging into the model and actually putting in numbers. There's nothing in the model that says anything about multiple buildings.
Right.
So maybe you could get away with that, maybe you couldn't. It wouldn't be something I could answer.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me that unless you sit down with this thing and start putting in real numbers and looking at the results, which it tells you by parcel, you don't really know what you've got. And I don't know that I have the best solution for it. I think any of us might come up with a good solution. There's 1,000 ways you could set the existing parameters here.
Well, it's a very complicated whack-a-mole game, isn't it? You push
It's
one
not-
thing down and something
You know,
else pops up.
I wouldn't, it's not hugely complicated. There's like 6 variables that really matter. And then you've got different zones within the same, different overlays within the same area that you can tweak with differently.
Yep.
But what my concern is and has been, that if we continually wait to go back and forth with Innis on coming up with this fine tuning, we're going to find ourselves playing a musical chairs game where we take whatever we have when the music stops.
Agreed.
And I don't think that's going to give us a good result.
So, Richard, can you, while you're driving around for the next couple of weeks, will you have time to start fiddling with the model and telling us what's the
I
best?
think we need access.
I think all of you should
we
be fiddling
need
with
the
it. And I will be
spreadsheet.
happy- And I will be happy to,
So we can all get access to it, but maybe you can,
yeah, I'll tell you what I can do. I've loaded my version of the model. Now, I would prefer that you have Emily's version because then you might have more confidence in it. When she gave it to me, it was locked. So she'd have to be willing to give you an unlocked model. If she won't give you an unlocked model, I'll give you my unlocked model. But I expect she will. And I can certainly give anyone who's interested in doing it some, for what it's worth, whatever I've learned in playing with it. But I'll tell you, it's going to also put you in there's another slight complication to this. So the way that model works is that the model contains 5 areas. You set up 5 areas. You could do more, but it starts to get complicated because their model only does 5 areas at a time. So we already have 4. So we could presumably break up the Pine Street into 2 pieces for purposes of our work. I'm making a kind of preliminary decision that we're going to split that overlay at Powerhouse, I guess.
We have more than 4. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
And And then what you do is you set the parameters for each of those 5 separately. It tells you exactly what the density is for each of the individual areas, and it tells you what the overall density is for the total. So, yes, I think absolutely everyone here, this should be a working task, and we should be working to come up with our best solution. And if Emily tells us that it doesn't work, then for some reason that we don't understand, well, then that's fine. But I don't think we want to wait for somebody working at Innocent Associates to get to where we want to be. It would be impossible for them to do that.
Well, they're not, we don't,
We don't
they're
have enough-
doing things and we don't have enough information as to what you can do in order to, I played with it early on and there was flexibility in it. And I don't know if their flexibility they're using is what we want.
Well, I know what they're doing. What they're doing is they're not using any square footage limitations on first and second unit. They're not using any caps. What they're doing is plugging in, and she has done a few other things beyond that, but what she started out with was 40%, 70%, 3 stories, and same setbacks as the general district, and then nothing. But with our situation, we're going to have to do more than that, because these small lots and the tremendous variations we have in the sizes of lots within these areas makes it important for us, I think, to really tune it carefully. And then we have a big decision to make, which is what do we give up in the town versus the LCD? Because just preliminarily, if you don't put 150 units up in the LCD, which is 20 per acre, you're hurting, in my view.
Well, I think that we've talked about a long time about having greater density in Powder House Lane.
Yeah.
I think we need to play with that. You know, I think we need the option to play with this stuff and come up with ideas instead of having it all come out of 1 or 2 people, you
Oh,
know?
I'll mail it to you tonight.
Okay, yeah.
And,
Me too.
yeah, everybody. I'll mail it to the,
Email
Yeah.
to Gail and she
Yeah.
can spread it to all.
and what I have right now is 4 districts, not 5. So, but I think that'll suffice. And as far as we have to have Powder House more dense, well, that's going to happen anyway. I mean, by the way,
I know it is, but the fact of the matter is, we're putting this stuff out there. We're not dealing with any of these details. So if we make Powder House Lane more dense, how can we down adjust some of the others to make it more reasonable? And we talk about it, but we haven't modeled it.
well, I think I've been talking about that and modeling that for about the last 2 months.
Well, so have I. And we're not getting any place. And I'm
So we'll just do
really
it.
frustrated.
We'll do it, then we'll tell Emily this is how we want it to be modeled.
Yeah,
Right.
I think also I should send the model to her. I want to make sure that there is nothing that I have done that,
Yeah, that's a good idea.
but like I said, maybe you should ask her to send an unlocked model to us, because
Sure.
I would be happy to see everybody using her unlocked model rather than mine. It just takes a little heat off me.
Come on, you really want to bear with this whole thing.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this?
Looks like we're going
So-
backwards.
Yeah, so I get a question. So do we want to, I mean, so as far as the model goes, maybe we should work through a few items so that we're all kind of working off the same thing. In other words, for example, setbacks. Are we going to have one setback, or are we going to like defer to the underlying district, because then that changes quite a bit. So
What I would like to see, I think, is that we use the underlying zone dimensional requirements as much as we can, make as few changes as possible. And I think that will probably, except for Newport Park and for maybe Powder House, I think that's probably what we want to see, is the same basic zoning
So I guess-
arrangement.
What I'm going to send out is the general, is plugged in with the general district setbacks.
okay.
Okay.
and the general district coverage,
Mhm.
40/70. But
D1 is, D2.
We don't need to use the 70, we just need to use the 40.
But D1 and D2 are the same as the general district, I think.
They're
Yeah,
pretty
the
close.
setbacks are the same.
Yeah, so
Setbacks
it's,
and.
lot coverage is
lot
pretty much the
coverage
same.
And
and the
buildable
minimum lot
size,
size is
minimum
the
lot
same.
size.
Well, D2 doesn't have a lot size. D2 is merely an overlay district on top of the existing districts saying that you can build
Two-family by right versus.
two-family structures by special permit.
That's right.
Okay,
So there's no lot restrictions on it per se.
okay. And,
It's the underlying district that controls the lot
and
size.
D1,
That has the 6,000 square foot lot.
okay,
And D2.
That's the Arbella Street area, that area in there.
yeah,
D2 is the one that goes on both sides of Pine up to Pleasant.
right.
It's on
it's the
Pleasant,
heater.
one side of
It's
school.
the heater.
Yeah,
one of the things that you'll notice when you work on this model is that there's actually 3 lot sizes it asks for. One is minimum lot size, then the first unit size, and then the additional unit size. Frankly, I don't know what that,
I did it without the first, the second and third unit size.
I know you did,
just-
but
and
that's
I
where,
like that.
in my opinion, that's where you tune it.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the first number means. It doesn't really matter. What you'll also see, I guess you would expect to see, depending on what you set those first and second lot sizes for, a lot of lots have no multifamily capacity.
Right, that's the
One of
problem.
the questions that I have, which I don't know if we've answered, is what, if anything, does MBTA zoning do to a lot which does not qualify for multifamily? Does it change the general zoning laws that currently apply? Well, you shake your head, but do you really know?
I believe that, based on when I looked at the model, it's doing the calculation as to what you can fit on the size parcel that's there.
Oh, I know how it's doing the calculation. That's not my
And
question.
so if you can't come up with 3 units, then it's not multifamily.
I understand, but that's not really my question. My question is this. We know that the general district zoning requires that allows you to convert a single to a 2 or 3 family only if you stay within the envelope of the building
Right.
and only if you provide parking.
Right.
My question is whether or not putting those properties inside the MBTA zoning alters that restriction, even when that parcel does not specifically allow you to go to 3 units. I don't think that's obvious.
I think that's
I
what
think-
we address in the text of the
I
bylaw.
think if you can't qualify for a multifamily under the MBTA, the underlying zoning has to take it.
I hope that's true. I'm asking that question because I
So the
don't know
question
that
is,
that's
does it
true.
add to our capacity to be able to?
It wouldn't be
It
included.
certainly
in the
doesn't add to our
capacity.
capacity, but
No.
would you be willing to, bet $1,000 on whether or not it alters our underlying zoning? We're putting an overlay on there. I don't know.
No, it doesn't,
No.
unless, as long as your language is clear, that you're not altering the underlying zoning, that if you're utilizing the overlay district requirements, you have to meet those requirements, and it doesn't change the underlying.
Right.
So for example, if you have a one space per
Okay.
unit as opposed to 1.5,
Well, I don't want to belabor the point, but I want to really, really, really make sure, because this is an important point to me, because what it would do if it did not allow the existing zoning to work through is what I have long argued is important, and that is it would increase the ease of taking
Demolishing
single families to
buildings.
3 families when they don't otherwise.
So your point being
Emily
that,
has said that the underlying zoning is not impacted.
Well, of course it's not, but under what circumstances can you do something under the new zoning? Can you only use the new zoning when you happen to have been computed for capacity of 3 units? I don't know that. The MBTA zoning doesn't limit the number of units that you can put on a
Right.
parcel. It only means that we zone to that. I just don't know.
so if under
It's
the,
probably okay.
Our
under the
zoning
existing,
will
under the
control it.
existing zoning, you can convert a single-family house to a 3-family by right,
With restrictions.
with
No.
restrictions.
I want to make
So
sure those restrictions don't go
would
away.
remain, they would remain,
Well, we hope so. I hope so.
I think we've talked about this a lot.
yeah.
No, we haven't talked about this in relationship to the MBTA zoning at all.
Well, I think we can simply say in the language of the overlay district that that it does not apply to,
Okay, I won't belabor it. I just want to make sure that we keep that in mind,
Sure,
so that we don't
because-
allow that to get overlooked.
it's reasonable. Yep.
What happens to the parking? The parking under the
She's
existing
assuming 1.5
zone?
per unit.
That's what it is
And
now?
that's what we
Yes.
have in town
That's what it
today.
is now, yeah.
Yeah, that's part of
That's
it.
consistent.
And I think that if we were to increase it greater than 1.5 per unit for the MBTA overlay district, we could run into problems because the state would feel it's more restrictive.
Right.
On the other hand, we might want to, depending on what the model does, you might want to consider saying one space for one single bedroom or, I don't know.
One or two bit.
You know, it's
maybe.
a weird thing, and
I
I don't.
don't know how that would.
It doesn't
work.
impact the
It's a weird
model.
thing on the model, Sarah. I found that changing the parking didn't make a lot of
Doesn't,
difference.
right, they're assuming 300 what is it, 300 square foot per parking space, and we have that amount of open space because
Well, I
of
think
our
that's right.
coverage.
I
Yeah,
think
that's right.
We
I
have
think
it, it's
that's
not
what
an
happened.
issue.
So it won't matter, I guess.
No,
I plugged in high parking numbers and it didn't seem to be much.
whether the lot itself, because topography allows parking, is irrelevant for the model.
Yeah, although
It's just a strict calc.
It would be too bad to require a space and a half for Newport Park if it got bigger.
Well, we can have separate requirements for that.
Exactly.
Well,
Same as
yeah,
for Powder House Lane, if we allow bigger density, maybe we want.
Exactly, that's exactly
Right.
my point.
Yeah, or the opposite. If we do the LCD, we may want to require, let's say, 2 spaces per unit.
Perhaps.
Perhaps, I mean, just throwing it out.
Yeah, the parking alone eats up an acre and a half over there.
Mhm.
Okay, I can't tell if people have if any public comments here. Where can we find out who's?
Lorraine Iavani? Lorraine Iavani, can you
Hi,
hear me?
Lorraine.
Sandy had her hand raised,
Oh,
and
okay. Lorraine, go, Sandy's a member of the task force, so let her speak first, and I'll come to
No,
you.
Sandy isn't.
Oh, Sandy Rogers? or
Okay.
Sandy Barber Turner.
the Sandy is Sandy Rogers. Go ahead, Lorraine. Sarah and I can go after.
Okay.
Okay, terrific. Good evening, everyone. One of the things that I'm hearing is Mr. Smith asking for clarification on whether underlying zoning will remain in effect. And I want to stress that I absolutely agree with that. And I think that would be a major point in terms of educating and soliciting agreement with residents. So change is not always a good thing, but in some cases, if you have things that aren't changed as much, it might be something that people might be interested in supporting. So we have to make sure we get a clear answer on that. The other point I want to make here is I'm not sure why Innis is locking the model. I don't know what that means. It sounds like a control of certain algorithms. And you know, the level of frustration that I hear is because it's very hard what you're doing, trying to fit all of this into a very unique seaside town. So yes, by all means, let's get it unlocked, and those, and you folks, Mr. Smith and company, whoever is, skilled in looking at it, take a look at it, because I raised this issue as to what the base data is that we're relying on. So I would like to see that unlocked as well. I would like to also, just a matter of correcting the record, 20 and 22 Pine Street are in fact deeded. There's a special amendments to the master deed, which do in fact make these age restricted. It's just simply a matter of correction of the data on the record. Other than that, that's what I hear so far, and thank you for all your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Can I speak to the law?
Yes.
I was just going to say that, thank you for your comments. Our understanding now is that the deed restriction has no effect on our ability to put an overlay, to count the property in an overlay district.
I wanted to speak to the lock issue. I wasn't implying that Ennis and Company was doing anything to restrict our operation. I think they were merely protecting the accuracy of a model that they had prepared. We do have unlocked models that we got from the state. They're available to us. I was only mentioning her unlocking hers as a courtesy to us, and so it has not been an obstacle. I don't want to imply that it was.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Sandy Rogers.
Hi, I've got a couple questions, and I think one of you mentioned this, is we're looking at the lot sizes and we're not looking at topography. So if a lot cannot be built because it has water on it, that is not factored here. We're just looking for density in square footage area. We're not looking at whether it's a viable building lot. Just wanting to be sure. I know if there was mention of like, well, if we can't put a driveway in there, then the developer won't develop it, but we can still count it. So I'm just, that's my first question. I'll sit there and I'll wait and I'll ask my next question.
Okay, so the answer to that is, part of this, I don't want to call this a game, but it's a little bit of a game. We're dealing with a computer model that tells us what land we can zone and what we can't. We cannot zone wetlands or open water or any other
Cemeteries.
cemeteries. Yeah, there are a bunch of things. Educational land. We can't.
Municipal land.
Those are all called excluded land. So if we can include them in a district, but we don't get credit for the acreage or any units that we could theoretically put on them. So we're left with a kind of this funny blank slate where it says, now cut it up and zone it the way you think it's going to work. And go ahead, and sure.
I was just going to say, the state maps exclude land that is wet or that is underwater. But they don't do anything about land that's vertical or rocky beyond.
Or a floodplain.
Or a floodplain.
Yeah.
So,
Right. So some of those lots on Pine Street have like a stream behind them, and some of the other lots in other areas, as long as they're not deemed
they're still
legitimate wetlands, you can put the density in there, even though.
Yep, they're
Yes,
not
we
reflected
can.
on the state map.
And I want to make this clear also, this does not override the Conservation Commission's
Right.
responsibility and authority over the land. And the state law is very clear about that we're just zoning it, we're not approving development projects.
Right. So by Powder House, near Newport Park, they might have to ratchet in that acreage based on what the Conservation Commission says. But you
Exactly.
can still leverage whatever acreage once you do the setbacks and everything.
Yes, now
To count it.
one thing that would happen, the land that is flood prone or ecologically sensitive is called sensitive land. We can zone it, but if we decided to try to fool the state by just creating districts in sensitive land,
Yeah.
they would see that and then say, no, that's not acceptable. So we've got to make a reasonable effort.
But we
Yeah.
don't need to decrease our acreage by acreage that the Conservation Commission has control over.
That's correct.
We can include that.
That's right.
Right. So that's one thing. The LCD area, I'm not sure if that area is where there's hills, both in whatever districts in town and also in the LCD. I heard something earlier that said 3 stories. We have a certain 2-story plus whatever eaves or whatever limit. And I think that that's one of the concerns that everyone has in town is one regarding when you add density and you add more height, that's where it starts to overwhelm what our town is used to. And the same thing, if you're adding chunking up, like, yeah, we put 3, 4, 5 stories out in the LCD, some of that space is very high up. And so I think that we have to be very cautious looking at topography ourselves. And even if we allow it in the district because of density, are they going to be looking at, like, if you're adding the square footage because you're allowing for that height, then you have to change the zoning for that height. And so
Sandy,
there's just a real concern over the height aspect.
the property we're considered right now in LCD is the Cape Ann storage, which is low. And the height restriction in LCD is currently 55 feet.
And it's also
Right.
already developed, so we're not talking about
Right.
zoning, pristine land.
And it's
Right.
abutted by wetlands. So it's only the currently disturbed part that could be built on.
Okay.
For the future in the discussion, we were discussing one area,
Yeah, we've
and
moved on to other
we
places.
probably
Okay,
should
I was
focus.
just basically talking about the heights
Yeah,
in general,
okay,
though,
yeah.
just in topography.
So Sandy,
Right.
there is one thing to keep in mind, which is the higher we can allow buildings to go, the less area we have to impact,
This is particularly true of the LCD.
especially in the LCD, but anywhere in
Right.
town. I mean, we're trying to minimize the impact on the downtown, and if that means we have to
Right.
go to 3 stories in parts of the downtown to get there, that might be a fair trade.
And that would change underlying zoning.
Well, it's like Powder House Lane is currently 3 or 4 stories.
Sure, yeah, but most of these buildings we're talking about, Powder House Lane's 3 stories. There are buildings in the downtown that are 3.5 stories. They're not typical, but they're there. So we're not breaking precedent necessarily.
And it's not changing the underlying zoning. There are two things. There is the underlying zoning, which will stay at the current height. If the overlay allows more height, then you have to live with the overlay rules if you want more height.
Right.
If you want to take advantage of the underlying zoning, then you have to stay with the whole of the underlying zoning.
Correct.
Right. And that's, I think, where it was just getting confusing when you were talking about underlying versus overlying zoning. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for all, like, you're trying to do.
Thank you. Okay, any others? Liz? Or who else was?
Gail can see the hands.
Gail, can you tell us if there's anybody else with a hand up?
Kathy Bellata has her hand up and Sarah Pierce has her hand up. And a gentleman had put something in chat.
We can't take stuff off the chat,
But
unfortunately.
I know, but I wanted to say that someone had put something there and he may want to ask his question. That's
Okay.
where I was going with that.
Okay.
I understand that.
Sarah Pierce, we'll go with you, I guess.
Hi, thank you. And I continually watching these meetings, I do not envy your job at all. This seems to get complicated as we go along and then somewhat sorted out. But I will stay within the area that we were initially discussing, which is like the Morse Court, Elm Street area. One thing I did notice on a preliminary map that had come out was just that there was a section by the Powder House and where the bike shop is that is directly abutting water. And so I know you just mentioned that was sensitive land and that would be under the guidance of Concom. I don't know if they've weighed in on any of these preliminary maps, but there's no buffer zone included there. And then secondly, just to follow up, my next question is, what would happen if a developer came into Morse Court? And I don't know exact percentages here, so don't quote me, but there are a lot of rental properties that are owned by a certain individual or family. What if they decided to, let's say 80%, they decided to sell all of those rental properties to one developer? Would they be able to develop that whole area, or can they marry the lots? Like, how would that work?
So they could technically buy all those units and combine them into a single parcel and develop it, yes. But they can do that today. This isn't going to be part of the MBTA overlay district. They have
No,
the
but I
right
think
to
there would
do-
be more incentive with the MBTA, right?
I don't know how many units are actually there. Maybe there'd be a slight incentive.
I think there are a lot of rental units. I just wondered. I mean, I lived on Morse Court for a while, but I know that I would say guess like 80% are owned rental units, and if someone came in, bought them all, and then let's say you raised it to 3 or 4 stories, we'll say 3 because 4 is a bit much, but
Yeah.
that could add a ton of density in that area. So
Well,
just
we can-
wondering.
So here's what we're gonna do eventually. We're gonna look at every one of these parcels. We're going
Okay.
to determine what's on it now, what is currently allowed under the current zoning, what would be allowed under the MBTA zoning, and what the probability of that happening would be. So that at every single parcel you'll be able to see eventually exactly what the likelihood of development is gonna be.
So if the probability was high, would that be under by right zoning?
Yes.
And I guess I know this sounds kind of foolish at this point to question again what by right zoning is because we've gone over this a lot, but maybe it would be helpful just to also add exactly how that would apply to an area like Morse Court and the properties that encompass at least 3/4 of that area.
So under the overlay district rules, you could build multifamily housing at a certain density by right, subject to site plan review by the planning board.
And receiving a building permit and complying with all of the building code in the Massachusetts Building Code, and subject to Conservation Commission if Conservation Commission has jurisdiction.
Exactly.
Okay. And is there any point where you think you'll get to a place where, at least in the village, that you would set a height cap?
Yes. We will set a height cap.
Okay, all right, thank you so much.
Let me just address one more time something that you brought up. We can zone for multifamily housing areas that are subject to control by the Concom. We don't have to make exclusions for areas that are sensitive.
The Concom can then come in and say, sorry, you can't build on it, but it does not impact our compliance with the law.
Okay, so the state's fine with you submitting plans that include wetlands?
Not wetlands, but
Buffer area.
buffer
Buffers.
areas, certainly.
It's an inconsistency in the regulation and one that if we don't take advantage of, I think we'll pay a price.
Yeah. I
Right.
agree.
Okay, just curious from the map, that's all, thank you.
Yep. Kathy Bellata.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you again to the task force for their great work. You've got some really viable options here. I have a question about the Lower Pine option, specifically where the gas station is. So right now, I think I recall, I just wanted to confirm, you saying that when you get to the point of looking at design guidelines, you can request that the parking be in the back, not on the street facing development.
We can,
Right.
we can not just request it, we can require it.
Require it. Okay, good. When you get to the point of doing those design guidelines and you're looking at the gas station on the corner, my question is that gas station has a lot of curb cuts and it's very pedestrian unfriendly. So I'm wondering, as part of your design guidelines, if it's possible to do something about those curb cuts so that if something were to be built there, if a 3-family or whatever was built where the gas station is, we could increase the safety, and not let it get worse because of development. I didn't know if that could be
The answer
included
is
in the guidelines.
yes, we could, and yes, that was what we were hoping happened.
Okay. All right. And just to clarify, I think Sarah mentioned that you didn't mention 21 Pine condominiums. We do not have an age restriction on our deed. So
Okay.
we are, any age can be
Well,
here.
it doesn't really matter because it's not, it's not gonna be affected by our
Right,
zoning change anyway, but thank you. Yep,
okay, that's it, thank you.
thank you. Gail, any more?
Not at the moment.
Okay, shall we move on to another district?
Oh,
Mary's got a question.
Mary Foley, One Pulaski. Just a question, our current zoning allows for accessory uses up to 4 boarders per unit. You can have a home occupation, nail salon, hairdresser, whatever. Is that still gonna be allowed in potentially all of these 3 units? Are you addressing any accessory uses in the new overlay?
So I would say that it'd be hard not to allow the same accessory uses that any other residential unit in the town has.
these are professional uses?
No, she's talking about in a residence today.
Yep.
If the owner has a home occupation.
Right.
They are allowed
Right.
to conduct it.
Yeah,
And it could be a nail salon, it could be, there's whole bunches of things that it can be.
There are things that it can and can't be. And,
Right.
And but certainly if you decided that you were going to do a new computer startup, you could do it.
Right, but you couldn't, if you have a 3-family,
Yeah.
you couldn't rent, under existing zoning, you couldn't rent one of the units
Right.
to a third party to conduct a business.
It has to be the owner.
It has to be
yeah.
Can I suggest that it would be premature for us to speculate on what we're going to do for the multifamily units? There might well be a difference for accessory uses in a high-density apartment building. But the important thing is that, as I understand it, no current use will be taken away, because anybody who is operating under the existing zoning will retain their rights under that zoning. It's only when you go and take advantage of a high-density MBTA zoning that you fall into a new set of rules.
But I'm not-
Otherwise, the rules aren't changed.
Yeah, but I'm not sure we could pass muster if we make it a lot more restrictive than the current zoning.
I'm just saying, it may not be an issue that we want to take up right now, because I couldn't say that a 150-unit apartment building should have the same set of accessory uses that we grant to small dwellings in the downtown district. That's just not obvious to me.
But you're talking LCD versus in town.
Yeah.
We're talking in town.
Well, I don't know what we're talking about, but we're talking about, I know we've got a question about accessory uses.
Well, it's a good point that we can get at later, I guess. Okay, any more questions, Mary?
None that I can see.
Okay, all right, let's move on to the next district. Let's take up Valentine and Summer.
Is that the one everyone did?
Yeah, those maps didn't get all.
Oh, yeah, we didn't get those.
Oh, sorry, oh, geez, no.
There's a problem at the top.
There's a problem.
Does Ann have a pile too? No.
No, these are all mine.
These, okay. This is, you only sent around one map?
Yeah,
I sent around, I have the times of the ones here, but the Valentine and the,
We only received one.
it's Valentine, that's what we got, right?
No, we're getting another one.
Okay. Here's Allen to Lincoln.
here are the other street ones.
And for the crowd out there, we'll have these posted on the website
Yes.
tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So you can figure out tomorrow what you're going to ask tonight.
Well, it's not on our list.
They're actually in the handout on the website.
Oh, okay.
They're in the 125 handout, 325.
I've never seen these
Yeah,
before.
so these,
They're different.
so
They're
what,
They're essentially the same maps.
it's the same maps, but what I tried to do was highlight in red the areas that we targeted to include in the district. In blue is the other area in order to make it 5 acres. So that, because people were asking, why did we draw the district the way we did? So, so I tried to kind of highlight some of the development constraints around these 3 downtown districts.
It's very cute.
So which area are we on now?
Valentine, Val, and Summer.
Okay.
If you don't need it, you can pass it.
Um,
Oh, wait a minute, no, it isn't.
Oops. Not extra.
So, Mark, would you like to explain this
So-
pinky green thing?
So the Valentine and Summer Development Constraint Map shows the apartments and condos directly across the street from the train
Manhattan.
station,
10 and 12 Summer.
10 and 12 Summer, which is a total of, between all those buildings, I believe it's 42 units, as the area that we wanted to target for a district. And then in blue is the other area that we needed to do,
This is the blue crosshatch.
the blue crosshatch. And so between the red crosshatch and the blue crosshatch, that shows the district that we discussed and presented to the planning board. The light green area to the north of that is our local historic district. And early on, I believe, the task force decided that they were not going to include any of the local historic districts. And so directly across along the train station, we have our big commercial district that we had also said we did not want to include in the zoning district because A, it would be a very high density of units that we did not want to see that many units in the core of the downtown. And also we would perhaps one day lose your one grocery store, you might lose your drugstore and some other essential businesses that serves the community. So that is why that is excluded. And therefore, the blue, it does include the gas station adjacent to it, and then it kind of runs up the hill and wraps around the very beginning of C Street to those old storage properties. And so that's how we get the 5 acres. And this is just slightly over 5 acres, which is our minimum size.
And the pink area, I believe, down there is National Register of Historic, a National Register of Historic Districts,
Yes.
which is because those, well, actually, the Valentine Movers, I learned, is not really the Valentine Movers. It is the
Oh,
Clark and
green.
Noble Grain Company or
Right,
something like
yep,
that.
yep.
But that, what does that mean? What does the National Historic Register mean?
It means that someone has registered it on the National Historic Register. It means that it has, they're old buildings. These are most all 19th century buildings, some as old as 1850. They have no protection.
Okay.
There's no, there's potentially some advantages to owners under that, but there is nothing that provides protection for them.
Okay.
What's the purple?
Oh, that is the National Historic Register.
Which one are you looking at?
I'm looking at this stretch here. Is that just the
No,
road?
that's the blue, that's just, no, that's all supposed to be the same color, I think.
Okay, the
Mine looks kind of the same color.
Where the blue crosshatch does go over some of the National Historic Register
okay.
properties.
Is that why it ended up being purple?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's why it's a little darker, because the
Okay.
blue made it.
But there's
blue.
nothing there.
But you can see the,
no buildings.
Okay.
Well, there's, I think, 4 buildings, 4 houses specifically listed on the National Register. of Historic
No, we're
Districts.
looking at the section right under the red. It looks kind of purplish, there's no houses in there.
It's Summer Street, is that what you're?
Okay.
I don't,
Okay, what we're looking at is this,
That's
that's
street.
that's the street.
that's the street.
but it's purple.
You were
It's
just
not
wondering-
historic.
Good.
It may be.
Okay, the part that's historic then is,
So this isn't historic,
yes.
that's just,
And the part that's historic and
Historic
purple
street.
is the former storage
this is the
buildings.
purple.
Yeah.
One house, 2 houses, and an outbuilding. 3 houses, sorry, I missed the.
3 houses and the Valentine Movers. AKA grain silo storage.
Any other comments about this?
Do you know the ages of any of these buildings?
I do. I know the images of all of them.
Oh, that might be.
Well, I can, well, I'll look it up.
Okay,
But they're between 1850 and 1900.
okay.
I think actually the grain house may be 1926.
Okay, the house right next to the railroad tracks, I think, is newer.
Maybe, I'll look it up.
You mean the little one?
The protuberance.
Yeah, the protuberances, that used to be the gatekeeper's house.
Oh, okay, okay.
But it has been renovated recently.
I figured it was a railroad utility building, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, it was for the,
it was for the gatekeeper, you
Yeah,
could
the
crank the
gatekeeper.
gates down. That's where he lived.
it's a single-family residence, and they've just.
So I have
some
a
work on it.
feeling that at least one of these houses on C Street is probably on a lot that's smaller than the minimum lot size.
Which one certainly the gatekeeper's house is,
Gatekeeper certainly is, but I think the next across the street from
okay.
them,
Hmm.
it's a pretty small lot. So, I guess we'll open it up and see if there are some questions from the public.
No hands up.
Any other thoughts from the task force? No, okay.
No, I think the only thing is, one of the reasons we wanted to include 10 and 12 summer is because it's pretty well developed, so
Yeah.
the chances of it
Yep,
having further development is unlikely, and the brick apartment building, which may leave something to be desired, certainly has affordable
yeah,
housing in it. It's restricted in that way.
yeah. Okay, shall we move on to Summer Allen to Lincoln? This is another weird reshaped piece of zoning district. Mark, I guess,
Okay, so we have 2 districts in crosshatched in red. The area kind of to the left side of the map is condos along, that's Allen Street.
Brooke,
Brook, okay, condos along Brook Street.
gotta get your streets right.
And at I guess that the next one would be Allen Street going back. We have
Allen
a
Allen
Avenue.
Avenue, but yep.
Allen, yeah, okay.
Consider this a language lesson.
Yes. Eventually I'll get it right, so take a few more years. So that there's a large building there that is condoed. So that we wanted to include that because the likelihood of that being developed is low, as is all those condos being redeveloped as well. So we kind of targeted that area, and the other area is just headed toward Gloucester is the gas station. And across the street from the gas station are 3 other buildings that are condo. So that creates the red area there. So
When you say across the street, across Lincoln Street.
yes, across
Where
Lincoln.
Manchester Electric is.
Yep.
So there are 3 buildings there. So in order to connect them, we've captured the small lots along along Summer Street to make the connection between the two. And there's 2 other small parcels in order to get close to the 5 acres that are within the condos there that have single family homes on them. So that's how we got to this. The other desirable thing is I turned on the layer that shows the water resource protection districts. And as you can see, the gas station is within a zone 2. So that would be a desirable use at some point in the future should they choose to sell, that perhaps it would be redeveloped into housing so that we can ensure that there wouldn't be any future contamination to the groundwater.
It's not good to have a gas station in the water resource district.
No, it's not really a desirable thing.
There's a building of office rentals at 76 somewhere, which was originally a gas station.
Oh, okay. So there were 2.
Yeah, there were 2.
That was a problem.
Okay, any comments? Questions from the public? Comments from the public?
No hands up.
Okay, this leads us to the LCD. We talked about.
Yes, I have sort of a comment. There's a small section of this, no, there isn't. I'm sorry, I'm way down Center Street. Sorry, I'm lost. Okay, let's go.
So the LCD. So again, the LCD, we picked a part of the town that is already developed. And I guess sort of remote, but near where the cell signaling facility and the MAC are. It's relatively flat land.
Well,
And it's low, yeah, near wetlands, but not in the wetlands. And we picked it because we thought it would have the least impact on the town if it were developed.
And it was also one of the smallest parcels that we could include in the LCD in order to get us to our 38 acres in total. So
that's right.
And I think the thing that we have to remember is that one of the reasons we're trying to stick close to the 37 is because if we go higher than that, then 50% of it needs to be contiguous. So we've kind of crafted these areas to have the Elm Street area be contiguous. And if we get too big outside of the downtown, then we need a larger contiguous area.
Well, any other parcel in the LCD is much bigger.
Right.
Therefore, much more full of potential units.
a question that I got from someone was if cell signaling wants to have housing for its workers, why don't they put it on their own 50 acres? And what I said back was, in order to do that, they would need a zoning change.
That's right.
And if it were a zoning change for in the MBTA zoning area, we'd have to take the whole 50 acres and make it suitable for, and that would be a bad thing.
That would be,
Because cell signaling is a wonderful neighbor, but this is, zoning is for decades and decades, and if they were to go out of business and somebody were to have the ability to turn 50 acres into high-density housing, that would be bad.
But we could have included 10,000 from the back.
I would like to
10
raise,
acres, that was separate.
I would like to raise a question which I think wasn't answered at the Monday meeting, and I
Okay.
think should be answered. And that is that we made a decision about 3 weeks ago to switch from 20 acres in the LCD and 15 acres in the downtown to do 25 acres, 30 acres downtown and 7 acres in the LCD. That was a decision that took me by surprise. And I think it was based upon the notion that there would be voter opposition to a large development in the LCD. That question came up on Monday night and was not really answered.
But it's,
And I think we should be very clear about what our answer is. I don't know that we all agree on the answer, but I do think it needs to be clearly stated.
I think it was two-pronged. Number one is the large development, but number two is to decrease the number of new additional units. Because
Oh.
everything in the LCD would be new, whereas if you're using a larger portion downtown that already has units on it, then your net new number is lower.
I would agree. Look, you know, my position is that I favor the larger development in the LCD, but I understand the argument on both sides. And I think another argument in favor of staying away from the LCD is that one can be almost certain that the LCD will get developed to the extent of the zoning that we provide. Whereas we can hold out some hope that other areas in town will not get developed. Of course, if they do, we'll be sorry.
And the other thing, I think, the advantage of the Calvin properties, the Cape Ann storage, is that property is one that CST directly overlooks, and that they might have a vested interest in what goes in there. So, you know, it's possible that if that property went up for sale, they might purchase it so that they could control it.
Well, because it's 7 acres, I think you're going to find that that's a very densely parked property there. As to whether that fits cell signaling's needs or not, I don't know. But that's a 7 acre property with 3/4 of an acre restricted. So you're going to be looking at 20 units per acre if unless we go for a much denser downtown, which I certainly hope we don't.
And really what we're, if you strip away all the veneer, what we're trying to do is make it hard to develop areas that we've designated, make it expensive to develop, which is the same thing all over again, and putting, as to Sarah's point, creating incentives for the fewest number of additional units. So, I see both sides of what you're saying, but I think for a lot of different reasons, we're going to end up in the LCD, and to the extent we can minimize the lot size, which means minimizing the number of new units, that's a good thing for the town. It's the best of a bad situation. And I think if you look at all these other sites that we've been considering, none of them are slam dunks to build, to develop. You take Powder House as an example. The terrain really isn't going to afford to do much more. If you go over there and walk it, right behind it is a huge outcrop. Huge. I mean, it's almost vertical. So that's unlikely to get built anytime soon, if ever. And I think what we are creating disincentives almost across the board for people to come in and develop the units.
Yeah, I said at the last meeting that I thought that while I didn't like the idea of 30 acres downtown, I thought we'd pick the best 30 acres that we could, and I still believe that. I personally just don't favor the trade-off we've made. That's neither here nor there. But I wanted to make sure that I felt like we really ought to be addressing in public this issue, because it's not obvious.
No, no question.
Thank you for bringing it up. It's good to have that discussion. Any comments from the public?
Yes, Sandy Rogers has her hand up.
I have a question. Is there any rules that you have to supply infrastructure to these lots as a town?
The answer to that is no. We're under no obligation whatsoever.
And right now, we don't have water and I'm not really sure about the water and sewer going on out to LCD.
So my understanding is that the town has applied and gotten a grant to extend 2.5 million?
3.5.
3.5 million to extend sewer under 128
Sewer, yeah.
to connect to,
And to enlarge the water mains and the
which
sewers
is what you,
going all the way down Forest Street to connect into the connection in the existing culvert under 128.
But not, what's the name of the street that goes down into the LCD?
Atwater Avenue.
Atwater Avenue.
Atwater.
But
They already have water.
Okay.
The back has town water.
And the sewer coming through the back door of under 128, I believe.
Right, and the water's in that same culvert.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I believe they're enlarging the water mains and the sewer pipes. And it's gonna go all the way down
the
Forest
sewer
Street.
pipes are new, the water is, I believe, going to be enlarged,
And the sewer on Forest is gonna be enlarged.
and mill.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if necessary, all the way down to the wastewater treatment.
Yep.
Down to the junction of the mains, the serious mains.
Okay.
But that's to service CST and not any.
That's still being discussed, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for answering that. Second question is, someone else brought this up and I'm not aware, is if the underlying district allows certain use cases, the LCD being commercial, allowing for things like cannabis and stuff like that, are there any regulations about multifamilies being next to certain types of properties?
Yes, there are. It's part of the bylaws governing adult entertainment and cannabis, that they can't be closer than
200 or some odd feet, 100 or 200 feet.
It's in, when we allowed those things, we put restrictions on, and those restrictions are not, they are part of zoning, aren't they?
Yeah, but they don't impact what we can do in the compliance model to comply with this law.
Do they make it harder to put a cannabis shop down there?
Yes.
Well, and also makes it harder, if they put a cannabis shop down there, then it's harder to put in the residential. Because they got more setbacks.
Pronounced cannabis.
I never pronounced it that way before in my life. I don't know why.
Okay,
Was this a new strain?
So,
Trying to pretend like I never heard the word before.
good for you.
so realistically, you could put multifamily zoning to appease the 40A there, but because of other zoning, they might be refused because it's too close to that. I guess. I don't know. Up to you guys to figure that out.
At the moment, there is no cannabis shop and there's no adult entertainment, so I think that the opposite would happen, if anything.
Right.
But you don't have to change the underlying
Nope,
No.
spot zone around
nope.
the
No.
space that you might want to have for family.
No.
The state model isn't that, compliance model isn't that sophisticated, which is to our benefit.
Yep. All right. Good. Thank you.
Mary.
Mary Foley. tagging on to that, I would just question, because if, with the marijuana and the adult entertainment, if we are potentially squeezing, where these would be allowed, because I think it's 300 to 400 buffers, depending if it's a school or a church or housing. If we're squeezing those into such a small area in the LCD that it seems restrictive, I think we could come into some legal issues
I
with
don't
that.
think so, because the zoning allows it. And there's nothing that has ever said that you couldn't change your zoning to allow residential in that area. So it's perfectly valid.
My only point is that we developed those bylaws to show that we're not discriminatory against those, and we chose the LCD to keep it out of the downtown area. If somebody were to apply and then say, oh, I've only got one spot that I can actually put this, they could claim it's, but that's for you to decide. And then
The LCD does include the Gordon Woods area.
Yeah, it's a.
I don't know that we zoned it for that part. I know we might have specified just the developed part of the
I think
LCD.
it's the entire LCD, but we can check.
Yeah, so we did like northerly and southern, whichever
Okay, fine, you think it's exclusively on the east side of School
It
Street?
could be, don't quote me on that. We've done that with
Yeah.
the other, what's
look it up.
allowed, commercial uses, what are allowed, so.
There's still the medical building. No, there are,
So,
There's lots of space.
so as long as you allow opportunities, doesn't have to be financially feasible, but opportunity to locate a adult entertainment establishment in a zoning district, that can change based on whether, let's say, the church was there and all of a sudden it closed, right? So now you can have a bigger area, or a school goes in, or now you have to have a buffer around it so the area shrinks. So as long as what's left is still reasonable, as far as size and developability, then that's okay. It may never get developed. It might be the medical building, all that's left. And that's never gonna it's never gonna be profitable to buy that and turn it into an adult entertainment, so it'll never happen. But that's okay, that's legal.
Yeah, my only point was that there's sufficient
Mhm.
space for it to be.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it.
I'm looking it up, but
I would just like to raise the point, and I don't know yet if the LCD is the best option or not, but raising the concerns that if that area were to be rezoned for housing, that may help the 40B get through. So if we're saying we're allowing housing on one side, and we don't want it on the other, I'm just saying as we're through this process with the 40B, the state might say, well, now you've got water and sewer up there, you're allowing housing, so just something to think.
They've had the evidentiary public hearing. I believe everything has to be filed by like April 19th. And then it's going to be before the HAC, and they're probably not going to decide for 2 years. So I think that anything we change is going to fall in that in-between area. That it probably wouldn't impact. That's obviously been one of the concerns, but
They can't review, so whatever they have in front of them is all that they can review.
yes. So all of the pre-trial testimony, everything has been filed. They had the evidentiary public hearing in order to cross-examine witnesses. And now they have to file their briefs by, I think it's April 19th. I think they were only given like 30 days. And then it's sitting with the HAC and no more evidence can be brought in.
Okay, oh, that's good to know.
I mean, obviously, if the HAC does not vote in our favor, or either way, it can go into the court system. But I I think that's water over the dam by the time you get to that point, that they're not gonna be looking at new zoning changes.
Technically.
I mean, they're already trying to argue that their single access is not an issue because of the driveway at CST. And the driveway at CST hasn't even been approved, and it loops all around the property. But that was brought in.
Okay.
So if it were a little earlier, it would make a difference.
Well, thank you for that. I can sleep tonight.
Okay, are we done with these districts? Any more questions, comments? All right, I'd like to move on to the next topic, which is a discussion of design guidelines. We already have them pretty well set up for the downtown districts. The question is, the architects group that we put together would love to be able to work on them for the LCD if we do a project in the LCD. And the question is, do we have any guidance for them as to what the design guidelines would look like for a project in the LCD? And I'll give you some options to think about. One of them is it could be just one big building. Another is it could be a bunch of clustered townhomes or even triplexes scattered around a village kind of atmosphere. Or it could be some combination, or it could be a garden-style apartment complex, 2 or 3 stories high, 20 units per building. So I don't know if any of those are things we don't want to see necessarily, or whether we'd like to see something that kind of mirrors like what we have in the downtown, or whether we'd rather preserve as much open space as possible and make it as dense and as few buildings as possible.
I'm going to suggest that we might want to hold this conversation until the end of April.
So when?
End of April.
After a town meeting?
No, after the briefs are due for the
Oh,
40B appeal,
okay,
because that's certainly something they could use.
okay.
That's just my opinion. Other people
Till
can
after
say.
when?
After Deja is there.
It's, I'll look up the date.
Yeah.
I don't have it offhand.
Sure.
For some reason, my brain said April 19th, but
We're gonna have to hammer that down very quickly then, after that, because we'll be having to draft zoning in early May to present to the select board by close to the end of May. I mean, we're gonna have to move rather rapidly after the next couple of weeks. So whether it's modeling and figuring out the parameters, the LCD design, just in order to keep on a schedule to be able to bring it to the select board and hold public meetings, feedback, etc.
I didn't think the design needed to be done when the zoning was done.
Well, it's going to be part of the zoning package, so the state's going to want to see that, and we're going to want feedback from them as well.
I also question whether we really need state pre-approval.
We don't necessarily
For the
need
design
that,
guidelines.
I think.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff. I just think Emily understands the model. She seems to pretty well know what's going to be allowed and what isn't. We're losing at least 90 days by doing that pre-approval. And I'm not convinced we're going to be ready. And I just question how important it is.
Well, does it have to be part of the package or does it not? Where do we go?
Well, we don't know. I don't think enough communities have submitted packages yet to know.
She said we could do design standards later, but if you're going to include some of the design pieces in your zoning, then you'd need those pieces.
Even if they're guidelines. No.
No, if they were mandatory.
Well, they could be regulations of the planning board, that could be, that might be part of it. In which case they could be drafts that could be modified once the bylaws pass.
Yeah, the ideal location would be within the site plan review bylaw that refers to design standards for the LCD or in the overlay district.
But I thought we didn't
MBTA.
want everything in the bylaw. I thought we wanted the majority outside of the bylaw. So it
The
was more
bylaw would
flexible.
be specific to the overlay district.
That's
That's
correct.
No, but what we
Yes.
talked about was the need for some flexibility. And if you put the standards within your bylaw, then they need to be very black and white. And the design standards being looked at were not that black and white, so they were more guidelines, and therefore they would be used as part of the site plan review, but not be incorporated into the bylaw. That was my understanding.
Yeah.
The approach we took in talking about the guidelines in the subcommittee was that we would give our conclusions to Emily, and she would tell us what we could build in, what we could get away with as part of the zoning, and what we could not, and still meet compliance with the UHLC. And I think if I got the final part of what you were saying, Sarah, that's exactly right. There will be some things that we can get into the zoning, and that might include some massing and parking orientation. There might be some things we can get in there, but I think we should rely on our consultant's advice in that regard and make them as, take as much of them as we can into mandatory and leave the rest as optional guidelines.
Part of the question is, what's our timing? Can we do this late April, early May?
Well, the best understanding I have in my conversation with Emily is that anything that is going to be part of the mandatory had better be included in our application to EUHLC, even for preliminary review, because otherwise we run the risk of finding a surprise afterwards. And, I read an interesting comment in the article that I sent to you, Chris, about from somebody at UHLC, and they said that every single review that they have made so far has been returned with comments for change.
Oh, really?
Now, I don't know how many that is, so I don't know how meaningful that is, but that
Probably
was a
not
comment
many,
from
but
an
still.
UHLC official.
Interesting.
So I think it sort of tells me there may be more sticklers than we would like, and would not be wise to alter what we send to them
After we say
after we've gotten it approved. So that does put pressure on us. It's a good point. And particularly pressure on our LCD standards, which we do not have. And the question that we had, I hope am I out of?
No, this is right on
The
time.
question that we had amongst the architects and the committee in our meeting was, well, what do we do about the LCD? We don't know. It's not our job to decide what the LCD is supposed to look like. We need some guidance from probably planning board as to, what are your what general kind of guidance can you give us as about what you want? Do you want townhomes? Do you want a community? Do you want bigger buildings? Do you want whatever? Now, the truth is that if we have 7 acres and we decide that it has to be 150 units, I don't know that there's a lot of room to maneuver in that. But I do think that we should put, as a task force, we should put before the planning board a question that goes like this. All right, tentatively, we've decided we're going to take 7.6 acres in the LCD, and it's going to be, let's say, 150 units. And we think that that is going to look something like this picture and show them a 150 unit building, of which we have plenty of examples. And is this okay for us to proceed? At which point we can go to the architects and say, we'd like to do something that was general for all of the LCD forever, but let's just get something that works for this 7-acre parcel with this density of building so that we can have something in front of us and get something through quickly and get the planning board to sign off on it before we go ahead with it. So that's a real rush item right now, it would seem to me.
So, one thing I'd like to put on the table is, although we cannot require senior housing, it's certainly a good use for this part of town. It might include an assisted living facility. And as long as that's allowed, not required, we should create some kind of design guidelines for that kind of use.
You mean an additional guideline, not a guideline that says,
Incentives.
Not incentive, I don't think we'd be, well, it'd be nice to do incentive.
I doubt we can do incentives because it's age restriction.
No,
This is
outside,
specifically-
this is outside of the MBTA law.
Yeah,
That's gonna,
you can't limit the
Right.
use.
But we can have incentives to do
We could have
senior,
incentives to say.
to
if
allow a
it's
higher
senior-
building or
Sure, we
something.
could do that, we could.
but I think that area is gonna need to be dense. And so I don't know whether you really wanna have incentives to make it even more dense. You're probably gonna have to allow the 55 height.
Yeah.
Just as a matter of fact, the townhouses, I don't think you're gonna, I mean, that really should be off the table. It really should be what kind of village, what kind of design, what kind of, or are you okay with kind of, because it's out of the way, the standard, 4-story, let's say 40B type buildings.
2 lots.
15 units to the acre translates to 3-story dwelling apartments.
This is, yes, that's right, but this is, if we go to 150 units, we're talking about 20 to 25 units per acre.
We weren't talking 150. We were talking 100.
Back up, we've talked about a lot of things, but one of the things that Richard has said several times is that unless you get that level of density in the LCD, we have to have much denser downtown.
It's a trade-off.
That's not what these numbers are saying, so I think that we're jumping to conclusions.
Well,
It's 100 to
Assuming-
150.
yeah, well, 100 is 3 stories, 150s, now you're talking 4 stories, elevator building, and
Well, that
Large-
works
larger
well for senior.
Yeah.
which would be fine for
Yeah,
seniors.
even if it's unrestricted, a 4-story elevated building allows anybody to stay there. And
Sure.
they'll be required under ADA requirements to have elevators, to have accessible units. There'll be a lot of benefits to having a 4-story elevated building, even if you don't require it to be age restricted.
Well, if it's
Do
4
we don't-
stories, you gotta be elevator.
We don't have a story restriction in the LCD today, do we?
No, height
it's
restriction.
just height of
55 feet,
55.
yeah,
And if this particular site, because it's so low, it wouldn't be obnoxious.
right.
Boy, I don't see why we would want to restrict it to 3 stories there. I mean, when you have that number of units, even if it's only 100, the taller the building, the less coverage you have, and the more, and remember, that's a lot of cars. It's 150 cars, it's a lot of land you've eaten up.
But the other thing that's interesting about that particular spot is that it's surrounded by protected woodlands. So the argument that we need to leave a lot of green space in there has perhaps a little less weight than it would if it were in the center of the football field.
That's true.
And if you did 150 units, you probably have to start thinking about putting parking underneath and putting everything on a pedestal. So now your building costs go from $350,000 a unit to something like $450,000 a unit.
I like
Which
that.
means nobody would do it.
Today, no.
Yeah, but the point is that,
They will at some point.
right,
Okay,
but
but
we can't require it to be 4 stories.
Well, if you
We have a
if you get-
55
If you try to get that at level of density, they could do something less. But if they were going to maximize the number of units on that site at 150, I don't think they can do it in a 3-story configuration. They have to go 4 stories.
So it's an interesting point because, if you think about it that way, why wouldn't we put 150 units in there?
Well, when we, it's the jigsaw puzzle.
It's not our problem as to how they would have to build it to make 150 units fit. It's their problem.
And there is the possibility that it would be cell signaling that would develop it
Right.
for their own use.
Yeah, it's possible.
But I think 150 units, given some of our zoning parameters on 7 acres would be very tight. So I think, that number, if we can push it down closer toward 100, you can accommodate the 4-story buildings, the parking lots.
Well, this is part of the whole equation, isn't
Yes,
it?
that's
Well,
right, the
and if
open
we-
space that's required.
If we have a
drainage,
55-foot height limit, why would we want to even talk about stories?
We wouldn't.
Why change it?
But we could just cap the number of units in the LCD
Well, we,
to 103 or something.
yes, but we need to fine tune everything else
Exactly,
first.
that's my point.
So it's
That's my
not
point.
worth talking about at this point.
Well, we
because-
know it's roughly around 100 to 125 units.
I'm not convinced of that because what we haven't done is we haven't talked about limits we might want to impose on some of the larger lots in the downtown area. We haven't played with that.
Well, but that's gonna be 20 units or 30 units. or
I don't
something.
know.
105 units is a density of 15 in the LCD. Actually, it's a little less because it's 7.6 acres. So
100 is 14.4 according to her thing.
Yeah, okay, 114. So, at 114, you're still having to maintain 15 in the 30 acres you've taken out of downtown. So, I mean, I really do think we need to get down. I'm not at all convinced that it's a good idea to lower the density in the LCD at the expense of the 30 acres we've taken out of the downtown. I just don't get it. And I don't understand why we would be particularly concerned about the expense that a builder might have to go to make it work.
I'm only doing it, trying to create a disincentive to build.
Well, the disincentive to build isn't going to be changed by us allowing more units. He doesn't have to build that many units. If we zone it for 150, he can build 100 units there for the same price that he could have built it if we'd zoned it for 100, right?
Economically, it's more attractive to have more units.
Well, yes, it may not be a straight curve though, right? So you may, to Jenny's point, you may find 100 is very attractive, 110 isn't, 120 isn't, 180 is. I don't know, but it's going to be complicated because you're going to have that threshold of an elevator building. But
It's
Again-
gotta be an elevator building in any.
if we were to zone it for 150, that doesn't disincentivize the building. It doesn't incentivize it either, because they can still come in and build 100 units.
Right.
If 100 is the sweet spot, that's what they'll do. And if 150 was the sweet spot, is that a problem for us?
Well, it's not a problem for us, no. I mean, look, you've
For the
got
town.
all these moving pieces. And I think we need to focus on your point. We don't really want to increase the density downtown. If we have to, where we're having to make the compromise is in the LCD. So, assuming that we share those two components of the puzzle, then, I think we work almost backwards to see what we have to do out in the LCD.
Yes, I think I was a little bit out in front of myself there. I agree. We need to
We
get
need
to
back
the numbers.
into it, yeah. I was gonna say that I'm looking at the property now, because we had an application before the ZBA. And it is basically fully built out.
Mhm.
So anything that goes in there won't be disturbing any land.
Mhm.
There's another factor, I guess it's worth mentioning. That particular site currently is mini warehouse storage, which is actually a very profitable business. More profitable than apartments. So it's likely, in the near term at least, to remain in its current use.
And he's adding a 13,400 square foot storage building, getting rid of a lot of the trailers.
A lot of what?
The trailers.
Yeah.
He's eliminating 50 trailers
Good for him.
and putting in a big storage building instead, yeah. and plans to do it on the rest of the property.
Well, our timing is impeccable then.
Right.
And that's probably the right thing for the economy as well. Frankly.
Well, the seniors downsizing, gonna have to put their stuff somewhere.
Right.
Okay, all right, I think we've exhausted this subject for now. I have a couple of ideas to think about over the next
Okay.
couple of weeks.
I think the task force has asked the planning board to consider what the planning board would like to see in the LCD. So perhaps we should
Let's do that.
wait for their wise advice.
I wonder how long we'll have to wait for that. And I wonder if it might not be better for us to offer them some alternatives. I do think they have to buy in to whatever we do.
Mhm.
But we know if we back into these numbers, we're going to have some sense of what we think we have to accomplish. And then we can go back and say, we need 100 units or 150 units or whatever. And this is the kind of thing we think we're going to have to go for. Is this okay with you? I'm worried about how long it's going to take. And I don't know how they would come up with that, given.
Right.
I mean,
The dynamics of committees
I'm
and meeting
saying no
every
more.
other week.
Yes.
Well, that segues
And
into,
you missed the piece I said, I'm nervous about us moving forward too quickly on it because of the status of the 40B appeal.
You know, there was another question.
Everything is due within 3 weeks, and then it won't matter.
Oh, could you explain that?
Yeah, so they had the evidentiary hearing, and now they have the final briefs that have to be submitted. And then it's with the HAC, and they can't look at bring anything else into their case. They've already brought the CST driveway into their case.
Yeah.
And if we discuss a lot of configuration for residential, one big building versus little stuff, that may give them ammunition.
Okay, I understand. So your point is that it would not affect the case if we waited 3 weeks.
Right,
It might still affect attitudes in town.
right. Yeah,
Understood.
that's just,
Yes, well, that's a very
and
good
I can
point.
come up with I didn't have it here. I have the exact date someplace, but
I had just thought this thing was 8 months out and it was no chance, or a year out or whatever, and there was no chance we'd ever know anything.
no, there's an April deadline.
Got it. We won't know anything, but we'll be
We
past.
won't know anything for 2 years, but yeah.
So the next thing we have to do as a group is get into the model and start trying to figure out what we can do for density
Yeah,
yes,
in the downtown.
yeah.
if there's any wiggle room or,
All right, that sounds like a plan, actually.
I'll send out my version of the plan, and then
I'll ask Emily to,
and you ask Emily to send out hers.
Yeah.
And I'm leaving town for a while on Monday. If there's any way I can help anyone who's having trouble with it, email me and we can do a Zoom or whatever. But I think everybody here probably can figure it out.
I also think we should ask our consultant to fulfill her responsibilities in this regard and explain to her what we're looking at and that we expect her to provide some of this.
well, I think Richard pointed out that we're just going in a circle by
Right.
doing that.
we need to play with it and understand what the impact of various changes are
Mhm.
before we give it to her and say, okay, this is what we want. Because she's just going based on what people are giving her.
Yeah.
And I'm saying I feel very uninformed because I haven't had the chance recently to go in and play with it to see what the impact is.
What do you do if you're a troglodyte and have no ability to do that?
Expect the rest of the committee to carry
See
you.
what happens.
Somebody else is gonna have to carry the water.
I played with it at the beginning and it wasn't difficult to play with.
For you.
If I figure it out, if you want to come in,
We've
We
got
we can
lessons.
play around with it during the day sometimes.
So, this is another dumb question. What, based on what Emily has done, what more do you think you're gonna get by fiddling around with the model?
So I want to figure out if there is adjusting density. So instance, Powder House Lane. Can we increase the density there by going to more than 2.5 stories?
Okay.
To get more units, and then does that enable us to decrease someplace else? Is there any way where some of the larger lots on Pine Street, we could somehow limit the total number of units without having a significant adverse impact on the density?
Denny, the figures in this model are going to be what gets written into the zoning. And the changes that you make on this model alter drastically the build out by parcel. You can meet 15 units per acre and have a completely different result with one set of parameters than you do for another. So, for example, you can make it 15 units per acre and have incentive to build in a lot of areas and relatively lower density in the larger parcels, or you can have very dense parcels and lower the incentive to build in others. So you can make a big change in what the incentives are. You can increase, for example, the number of parcels that can't even hold a multifamily unit. And when you do that, and you can, and at the same time increasing the number of units that you build in the larger parcels. So my point was that at some point we're going to have reached a conclusion where we have decided what numbers we have in that model, and that's what the zoning is going to be. That's what we're submitting to EOHLC, and that's what the zoning will have to be. So we really want those numbers to favor us, and there's just a lot of latitude.
And for instance, there's 2 parcels on Pine Street, which are 5,998 square feet. If you drop your minimum parcel down to 5,998, you're picking up 6 units
Okay,
for 2 feet.
okay.
That's interesting.
I'm just nervous that we are gonna run out of time.
Well, we'll run out of time if we wait to get a model back from Emily, tell her what we think, and then wait again to get another model back. There's just too much. There's just too much here, and besides, it's not that hard to do.
Plus, our budget with Emily, as far as modeling goes, is we've kind of blown past it because we've gone back and forth multiple times. And so by us working ourselves within the model, even and at our next meeting or the meeting after, discussing the various parameters, what we all worked on, and coming to some sort of conclusion, will go a long way, and also trying to get us, past go,
To increase communication and avoid open meeting law violations, could we feed our individual contributions through you?
Yes.
In fairness to Emily, she's got a $50,000 contract.
Right.
You think about how many hours she's spent on us already, and she's got to get us through to completion and not go bankrupt.
And
So
that's
she just
through
can't.
November.
She just can't spend that much time on this stuff.
That's through November. So that's a good segue to the schedule for the next month or so. So let's talk about that a little bit. So a result of the planning board meeting, I'd like to say joint meeting, but it was just a planning board meeting. We'd like to have a chance for the public to comment on all this. So we're proposing a public forum on April 4th. That'd be a week from tonight, actually. And just for, it'd be like a rotunda kind of a thing. And we'll publicize it and get as many people interested and say that we're going to be answering questions all night long.
And have variants on these to show and introduce. Take them up one at a time.
Yes.
And hope we get.
And we'll have them so that we'll be able to post them on screen so that people at home can see them.
Sure, yeah.
Because now at least a few of them are done, and I'll add some more.
Okay, the next thing is April 11th, we're proposing a joint task force meeting with the planning board. That would be 2 weeks from tonight. If needed, another task force meeting on April 18th.
Can I just go back to April 4th,
Yes,
the forum?
yeah,
What type of time are we planning on that?
7 o'clock.
Thank you.
The 24th is annual town meeting. Now, there's a slot open on April 25th, which is the next night. I don't know whether that's something we want, maybe we can put it off and decide if we need another meeting then. I just assume not meet right after town meeting, but maybe.
That
maybe
is
that's-
also a placeholder for town meeting if it goes past one night.
Ooh, okay, that's good to know.
Thursday would be the continuation.
I think that's unlikely, given the warrant that we have in front of us, but it probably would be inconvenient to have a meeting at the same time. I would be conflicted.
I would
Are we
too.
handing anything out at the town meeting?
Yes. Yeah, we're going to update the frequently asked questions and
Hand them out.
hand them out to, well, there'll be a table in front.
So you're going to get permission from Alan.
Yes,
And maps.
Yeah, maps.
and maps,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the 25th is out?
Well, let's wait and see. I think this is the answer. And then I think there should be a series of public hearings in April and May, just to keep people up to date with what's happening. So we don't have necessarily have times yet.
Public hearings,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Public.
forums.
Forums.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we had talked about doing one on the 27th, but now
27th of,
of
It'll be
Saturday.
April on Saturday, but I'm wondering whether we want to push that off a week or so, just because we wouldn't have anything for the LCD design.
Yeah, I think we should put it off.
Yeah,
Probably a week.
you know, if we could
Can you
put it
remind me
off.
when do we have to hand over our final product to the planning board in time for them to get it to EOHLC for a preliminary judgment?
So it's actually select board that does it, which is a question for, I guess, Ann. So this is all gonna come together in early June, it sounds like to me. And,
Emily said mid-July, so I thought that was
No, I
interesting.
talked to her, it can't be
Okay,
July.
okay.
It has to, I mean, ideally, we submit to EOHLC on June 1.
I
That
think
gives
it's
them,
more likely the 15th.
Yeah,
But in any
but-
case,
yeah,
the question is whether the planning board and the select board can do that with us together, or whether the select board would like to have their own separate shot at this.
I thought our charge was to make a recommendation to the planning board,
It is.
and then they're gonna carry the ball.
Well,
Is that right?
This is by June 1st, we have not only firm decisions on everything we're doing, but all of the legal language that incorporates it.
ideally, yes.
Well, that would mean we'd have to have, is Emily doing the drafting of the
yes.
language?
Yes.
So we would have to give it to Emily
Mhm.
in May, in early May.
I don't think early May. I think this is pretty much boilerplate.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is, and some of it is
Where we want to
specific
put in
to-
design regulations.
Just that,
and
they're
where
the
we-
dimensional requirements that we're coming up with.
Yep.
Those are things that have changed, but the basic overlay district uses, allowed uses, all that.
Right. She'll presumably strip out from the design guidelines anything that can go into requirements.
Yeah.
And that will be part of the submission, and the rest of it, we have more time on.
Right.
I think that's right. Now, it's still a mountain of work, don't get me wrong.
That's why I question, do we really need to do the
Well,
pre-submission?
let's
to the
Let's see
state.
where we are in the 1st of June.
Well, I
I
mean,
want to go back to the, so,
I've found if we set deadlines and timing, and even if they slip a little, committees and boards generally meet them. We can make final adjustments later.
How long you been here?
I know, well, that's why I'm trying to push.
So the June 1 date,
You know.
the June 1 date is, there's a 90-day requirement, there's a 90-day processing at EOHLC. So we give it to them on June and we get it back September 1.
theoretically, yeah.
Well, they
Right.
pretty much guaranteed 90 days.
They say 90 days.
They say it won't be less and it won't be more.
No
They
more,
say
no
that,
less.
but they're gonna get 150 of these on June 1st, is what the thing we have to think about.
Well, maybe they'll toll the whole thing if they can't, act within the 90 days. In other words, push the end of year, so forth.
I don't even think they've approved all the ones that had to comply by the end of the year.
No.
No, that.
Have they?
Haven't.
No,
Well, my point is that
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out why it's June 1.
right.
Well, because
We
if
never
we
talked
get
June
it
1
back,
before.
if we get it back September 1, then the planning board will need a couple meetings to make adjustments and then present it to the select board to be placed
We'll
on
get
the
public
warrant
hearings.
and hold public hearings in October. So town meeting is typically what, first couple weeks of November before Thanksgiving, right?
Yep.
So that's gives you 2 months to get adjustments, submission, public hearings, and that's still tight.
And that's working with something that has been approved by Beacon Hill, which we probably don't want to change.
Except there probably will be, as we've heard earlier,
There may be
that
comments.
there will be comments and things that will need to be adjusted.
I think it's like getting audited. You know they're going to find something.
Well, it may just be questions and we respond to them and they say, okay.
It sounds to me like it's just an enormous amount to get done in April.
And luckily you won't be here, Richard.
Well, the thing that
Like we
worries me, I still say, is November comes around, we have the town meeting, somebody gets up at town meeting and said, why didn't somebody tell me about all this zoning that's going on? Why don't we address it a year from now or something like, I mean, it's,
Well, the
we have to go overboard to
Communicate.
inform, publicize, let people know what's going on here. Somebody handed us a hot potato, we gotta do something with it here. It's not our choice, but.
Well, that's why we're having these community forums.
But we need to finalize things so that we can communicate
Well,
appropriately.
yes and no. I mean, right now is actually the perfect time to be going out on forums because we have something in semi-form, but we haven't made a final decision. When you go out on a forum in June, you're going to be telling people what you've already done.
Right,
Right.
right.
And that doesn't make people happy.
Yeah.
Makes them even unhappier than they already are.
I actually.
But
have a
legitimate, it's a
Wait,
legitimate
We
concern.
have a hand up.
Yes, Andy, yes.
So, given the noise around all of this initiative, is there another group that is working on the costs of complying, the costs of not complying? Because it is not only a choice to say, this is the way that you're zoning it, which is obviously important, but it's also just approving it in general.
So
I thought that was part of our contract.
our contract is to explain what's going to happen if we don't comply. It's not to make a recommendation.
But it wasn't part of the contract for RKG to do some type of a financial analysis.
Not on non-compliance.
No,
It was
not
on-
on non-compliance.
It was on what the effect of the density. is
Right,
and
yeah.
the build-ups. The biggest problem to me about the cost is that it doesn't look like the dollar value is even necessarily the worst thing about non-compliance. We'll know soon whether
We
this
won't
case.
know soon. We won't know
So-
until November.
You don't think they'll have
So,
ruled on that suit
Sandy-
against Milton before November?
No, they're not hearing it till October.
Yeah,
They're not hearing
they've
it.
agreed to
The
take it.
fast track is to hear it in October.
Yeah,
They only sit in May and October, and May was too soon.
So the injunction against them blocking any multifamilies is not enforced yet?
no.
No.
So Sandy, let me try to answer your question. Non-compliance is essentially against state law. And there are consequences for that. And losing the grants is not the main part of it, although it's critical as well. It seems to me that unless the legislature repeals the law, which is, I guess, possible, or if Milton wins the case, which is, I guess, also possible, if neither of those things happen, the state's going to sue us, and what they're seeking in Milton is not something we want to have happen here.
Let me
Yeah,
turn
and
that
also,
around
it's
slightly.
just-
Sandy, may I just interrupt because
Yeah.
I do that? Suppose, for example, that we have a town meeting in early November, and through our hard work, the town votes for this overlay district by a majority, because it's a
Sure.
majority vote.
Yeah,
And Milton does prevail,
okay?
and the law is declared unenforceable. Then we have to get a 2/3 vote.
So we'll do it. But my guess is that would be much easier than getting the simple majority to approve it to begin with.
Okay.
I brought this argument up before because it argues for pushing off our town meeting. I know that there's all kinds of factors there, but
But there's no reason we couldn't have a town meeting in.
A special town meeting.
A special town meeting in the
December.
second week in December.
Yeah.
given the heat around this, why wouldn't you do that?
Because we never do that, because
I don't
people go
think-
away.
The right,
I find it hard to believe that if they hear the case in October, that there will be a decision in sufficient time for us to take action prior to the end of 2024.
That's so incredibly irresponsible of the justice system in this.
They're fast tracking it, remember?
Those are words.
So I think that being very clear on that, but also in the nuances of, you were talking earlier about net new
Yes.
units.
Yeah.
The net new units, obviously, and financially, what that means to the town, to schools, to infrastructure, all that versus other alternatives. I think having that financial view is important. Thank you.
If you look at the financial costs, you mentioned infrastructure. The last time we reviewed our freshwater system, aside from PFAs, it's in good shape. They found a way to save 10% of the water by changing the way the wastewater treatment plant cleans its filters. It's 10% of the total treated water. So I think the water is okay. That 10% also comes out of the wastewater. Our restrictions on wastewater are the amount that we can discharge into the ocean. So if we use recycled wastewater to clean the filters, we're reducing the amount that actually goes out by 10%. So that gives our wastewater a certain, aside from the fact that it's in a position to drown, that's in pretty good shape.
our school's under capacity.
I'm getting it.
All right.
I'm just building up a big, you just blew it. Our fire and police coverage is very substantially higher than comparable communities. So we're already spending more than Hamilton, Wenham, let's not talk about Essex. And that leaves the schools. And our schools are currently 200 students in the high school, I think. I don't have the numbers in my face.
The studies, when they did the middle high school and memorial school, was assuming 1,600 students, and we have 1,200.
Yeah, so we're 400 students under
Capacity.
the capacity of the schools. Certainly,
You have to add teachers, but.
you have to add teachers and you have to, but,
And we're talking potential development over a long, long period of time.
it's not as if all of these things are going to
And
come
there's
out of
176 other communities, the majority of which are probably going to be better, going to incentivize the developers more than little Manchester with its little expensive things. Go build the 2,700 units and.
One building somewhere.
the area that's confusing is figuring, to me, is figuring out how many new students we get. And that depends on what gets built. And the calculation that was done by our finance committee for the 40B project was pretty heavy on the number of new students compared with what,
SLV had.
well, yeah. I mean, obviously SLB has great incentive not to assume students, but somewhere between the two, there's maybe a reality. And perhaps it would make sense to have someone who actually does that sort of analysis do the analysis for the school population. That's the one part of the infrastructure that I think we could benefit from outside advice.
Well, to some extent, it's dependent on the unit mix.
Right.
which we can't predict.
And these have to be quote-unquote family-friendly units.
Yeah, but they only have to be 1,000 square feet.
Right.
How
which
big
is
a family do you fit in there?
a very small family. I have a lot of smaller units, and I have 0 students.
And what do you mean by smaller units? What type of size?
Oh, these are small.
600 or 800 square feet.
Right.
Okay.
Which is
Not that
a
much
very
smaller than
acceptable
It's a slum landlord.
unit size for a single person or a couple,
Yep.
frankly, in today's realities.
You couldn't get away with doing that by limiting the square footage to that extent.
No, I'm not suggesting we do, but I'm just saying that that's a
It
very
does have
that's a very marketable size today.
direct impact on the projections for the school.
Well, I mean, I think the more important thing here is that if we don't go along with this, unless the state changes somehow by repeal or court action, we're not able to not do it because they'll come in and zone it for us. And I
Right.
think we'd rather have control of it than the state.
You know, I think we should also be honest with ourselves and with people in the town, and that is that we cannot afford to spend a tremendous amount of time in the next 2 months worrying about whether or not we comply with this law or not. We've got to come up with a solution. And then we can maybe spend a little more time worrying about informing ourselves and everyone else about what the consequences are. But right now, we got to get a plan together.
Yeah.
Right.
And the idea is we put together the very best plan we can. And then we and the town can look at it and say, is that plan worse
Right.
than
Right.
the alternative?
We don't even, until the plan is finally done, I mean, you almost can't even make that argument. You can make the argument, but let's get the plan done. That's
Right.
So when they did the estimate, when the finance committee did the report for the estimate for the 40B project, they estimated there could be 50 new students.
50?
50.
This is the finance committee or, okay, okay,
I'm looking at the report, 50 new students,
okay, all right.
which is, Manchester has lost lost 82 students between 2021 and 2023.
How could they have possibly done that analysis when they didn't even know how many new units we were adding?
No, this is for the 40B.
Oh, I'm sorry, but the 40B, which was 115.
136, and they took the, one bedrooms, two bedrooms, three bedrooms,
Oh, okay. Got
and the number of bedrooms, and they came up with an estimated 50 new students,
So that's good information.
I'm sorry, I was
based
wrong.
on the current percentage of students for the number of people.
So for every 135 units that we create, new units here, we can expect 50.
No, but what I'm saying is the 50 new is less than what we've lost in students in 3 years.
But you keep in mind that that study was done at the behest of the developer?
No, this is the finance committee
Oh,
response to what the developer submitted.
The developer thought it was going to be 20 students.
So did was the finance committee's analysis based on the type of unit or just
Yes.
on the average number of?
No, it was based on the submission for the it was actually based on the 157 dwelling units. And it was based on the number of 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedrooms that were in the project. So the project actually specified the number of each number of units. It looked at which were market rate and which were affordable, total number of bedrooms.
Is this 40B or MBTA now? I'm confused.
40B.
Sarah is quite correctly defending the Finance Committee's analysis from my incorrect attack.
Okay,
Mary, I'm sorry.
yes, Mary.
Can I just make a comment recommendation? Other communities on their GIS mapping have added a tab under the planning bullet that shows the proposed overlay district, so residents can go in and see what properties, they can map out the own acreage, all that kind of stuff. I don't know who does our GIS.
The assessor's office, and they have not ever used the overlay.
But there's a
Tab.
consultant, that oversees it. that we
Yeah,
could-
but they haven't ever put in the D2 as an overlay. That's not reflected in the,
Well, if you
There's
do the
another
zoning, yeah, it shows. But anyway, it's just other
It's a
communities
good
have done
idea,
it, and
Mary.
it's a good
idea. Why don't
tool.
we see if we can get that done?
Do we know what community is an example of this?
I can email you, I don't have it with me, but I can
Well,
email
I
you.
think it's easy to put another layer on top, well, I don't know.
I'm pretty sure Concord is one of them.
last I heard is that for the assessor to do that, the ZBA had to give them the parcel numbers. I'm not sure why the
Well, we
ZBA
can-
should have to do
You
that.
know, if I can put it on my GIS, I would think they can probably put it on.
Well, we'll find out.
Really,
We'll
until
get
now,
that.
we haven't had
We haven't had districts until now.
a solid agreement on the overlay districts.
Right.
That really has happened tonight.
Well, yeah,
So,
maybe not. I mean, we
yes, that's true. We may change it.
might tweak it.
Yes, of course.
We're getting pretty close.
I'll put up these maps I passed out tonight in a basic outline map so people can hold those up off of our MBTA website. And and then they can see exactly which parcels are included or not. So as the districts stand today.
Okay.
Okay, I've been trying to take a nap all night. Can we just adjourn this thing?
Well, it's up to you to move.
I move we adjourn.
I'm sorry, but I would like to ask where do we go with these design guidelines? We've got a month left. We've got to put something together for the LCG. I don't see how that's going to happen.
I think I know how to do it. And we don't have to.
You have a secret plan.
Not a secret plan.
Good.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to those architects, since you won't be here. And I'm going to tell them, here's the deal. We got between 100 and 150 units on this 7-acre parcel. Tell us what it's going to look like.
Okay, that's good. That's what I think you should do. Good. And then we have to put something in front of the planning board and get them to bless it And then we have to tell the architects to go off and give us some direction.
That's right.
But that's gotta happen really fast,
Yeah.
because, we don't, it sounds like April is it.
Well, we got
What
May.
happened today?
April and early May
Yeah,
to
we have
refine
6
it.
weeks.
You still need to get more public comment. There's-
You gotta have, if you're gonna submit it in June, when are you gonna have to give the language, when are you gonna have to give the final results to Emily to put it into language? I mean, is it a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? It's not a week.
I bet you can do it in a week.
She hasn't done anything else in a week.
I can do it in a week.
Okay, well, all right. I have no special knowledge.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
This was good.